Welcome to another CERT's IT Service Solutions podcast. In this episode, we cover the future technology trends for 2025. Our host, John Grainger, CTIO, speaks to Oliver Bethell, a CTO and part of the top 100 IT leaders within the UK. In part one, they discuss the future of AI, the impact of AI on jobs, and the public perception and trust around the development of AI. Let's dive into part one.
And we've got quite the challenge today because you and I are going to do some futurology. We are going to pick out some IT trends for 2025. But before we do that, Ollie, just for the benefit of the audience, for those who haven't seen you in the national press or on the news or various technology awards, who is Ollie Bethell?
Great question. So I'm right now Ollie the dad, Ollie the husband, but today in this room, Ollie Chief Technology Officer.
Cool. I don't know which is the best one. Probably Ollie the dad,
Yeah,
I'm guessing.
It's a lot of fun.
He sounds like quite a laugh.
It's a lot of fun.
Brilliant. So, if you close your eyes and think of 2025, from a technology point of view, what do you think is coming at us thick and fast? I mean, just to give you a bit of time thinking about it, part of the backdrop of this particular episode was, the cliche, it's not even a cliche, it's a sort of a truism, which was, the pace of change we experience today is the slowest we'll ever experience as long as we live because it's growing exponentially. And then there's just an obvious point, which is if that's happening, there becomes a point where just change is just coming at us thick and fast. It's almost continuous. So with all of that heading towards us, what are the things that are sort of out of the noise, the white noise that you're seeing patterns, or you're seeing something that actually that looks quite interesting? That could be something coming towards us.
To look forward, I'm just going to look back for a moment and try and characterize the last 12 to 24 months. From a CTO perspective, I would have thought most folks have had to deal with generative AI in one way or another. I think there's been a huge task to be able to separate the signal from the noise with all of this. And I feel like when I talk about AI, we're talking about it in analogies and metaphors rather than actually what it is, which I think is indicative of the fact that this thing at the moment, it's a raw ingredient and we haven't quite got the recipe clearly defined yet. So it's a bit like we've been given nuclear power. So we've got this amazing resource, this amazing bit of infrastructure, but we're still figuring out how to deploy it. And the thing that I'm finding fascinating at the moment is looking at the moves by the biggest tech companies in the world in this area and almost trying to extrapolate out where this might take us. And I feel like for the longest time, enterprise technology has sort of moved quite slowly. It's been in 10-year cycles. We've had a 10-year SaaS maturity cycle, I'd say. John, you remember back in the day how many conversations we were having about the security of cloud, for example. And then that sort of just didn't become a thing anymore because it just became how enterprise technology was delivered. And I feel like we're at the early stages. It's a bit like we're at the early stages of cloud again. So people are figuring out what this thing is, what does it mean strategically, what's going to be the actual thing that it becomes in the long run.
I throw a couple of observations or points to that, to what you said, because I completely agree with you. And I'm wondering whether we're seeing two broad elements emerge. Okay, so hear me out. So when you do a lot of business automation, in the last 10 years, a lot of it is the premises you go and look at a team, how they're currently working, and a lot of the automation is about easing the friction, the points between two teams, maybe streamlining an approval process or sort of moving some documents in a different medium. It's that kind of, it's sort of broadly staying within the same swim lane but making things a bit faster. And what I'm wondering is whether the agency that AI appears to be bringing us and where it's going to be, next year, means that actually there's almost now two tranches of thinking, which is sort of almost complete automation first. The principles is not really a human centric thought in terms of how certain work is done. So a
Yeah.
lot of our business technology is grounded in humans. So this isn't even a thing, shouldn't even be a thing, because we're humans and we work with tech. I'm just wondering whether AI is starting to produce a kind of a second category of automation, which is where the scope of automation is so much wider than we could have ever imagined 10 years ago. It kind of, you've got this opportunity to think very differently. And before folks say, oh, well, this is great, Skynet, and it's the end of human activity, I think the other part of that is that it also allows us to reimagine what the role of the human is amongst all of that. And there is a role for the human to be in all of that. It's just it can be quite different from how it is today.
I think there's two, picking up on that, I think there's two parallel thoughts on that. One is when we think about the people, there is a great business in attention-grabbing headlines, and they talk about job destruction. And I think ultimately every technology that has emerged has proven that there is maybe some short-term job disruption, but ultimately long-term job creation.
If I throw an example in, Ollie, to back you up there, which we might have discussed before, but the best one I can think of is when you wanted to get across the Thames in London, you would hire a boat, and there were hundreds and hundreds of boat operators that would row you from A to B. Bridges came along and decimated that particular industry, but you couldn't imagine London today without bridges because you wouldn't have enough boats.
Exactly. And you can pick so many different examples, whether it's people that used to light gas lamps every evening that were replaced by electricity, and then you had electricity boards and regulation around electricity and so on and so forth. And there is a whole world of implications that we can't yet imagine that will come from this. So I suppose closing that particular path, I don't worry about job destruction. I think if anything, it's going to be disruptive in the short term, but ultimately accretive to everybody. The other track is, what does it mean in the short to midterm? Well, there's a phrase that I heard which I quite like, which is AI is everything that isn't finished yet. And once it becomes more mature, then we don't think of it as AI anymore. It just becomes features of software. So we are in the early stages of this still being like magic. We're putting questions into prompts, and then interesting stuff is coming out. But as the use cases become clearer and more refined, the user interface around those use cases will become more refined, and we'll start to see them turned into user interface controls. And as we get used to those user interface controls, we won't think about it as AI anymore. We'll just think about it as I say, as features of software. So back in the 70s, databases were considered artificial intelligence for a while because it created this new capability that we couldn't possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And I heard a joke the other day, which was, do we think of Salesforce as just a thin database wrapper? Because ultimately the underlying infrastructure behind that is a massive database. And so we'll probably start to see over the next couple of years the commodification of really well-refined use cases. So I guess people that are using, whether it's Copilot or ChatGPT, or in the industry we work in, Harvey or Gilo, there will be particular use cases that are really stand out. And so
Yeah.
the user interface around those things will refine. If you look at Apple and their latest version of iOS, they are bringing these writing tools features in. So instead of you writing a prompt to say, redraft my email to make it more friendly, there is a button that just literally says rewrite professional, So expect this stuff to become commonplace.
Tried and tested, commoditized prompts, as it were. that you
Yeah.
no longer even look at the prompt in the same way that when you pick up a
Yeah.
hammer, you don't necessarily inspect the materials it's made out of. It's just
Yeah.
it's made out of the same materials that your saw is, but it's got
Yeah.
it's different purpose kind of thing.
Yeah. And a classic example I always use is if you go onto your smartphone and go into the Photos app, you can search for pictures of dogs or pictures of the Eiffel Tower or whatever,
Yeah.
and it'll find it. And that is an algorithm underneath the hood that's using image recognition to be able to
Yeah.
provide you with that answer. But we don't think of that as transformational AI. That's just
Yes.
just a feature.
If you build that out a bit more and say that you've got the large language model, architecture, but actually as time goes on, that will just be one of those hidden features. Other elements of artificial intelligence will combine to produce sort of even greater things, if I can use such a phrase. So just trying to tie this into 2025. When I looked at this early doors, I came up with 4 definitions. Now, apologies if I read this somewhere and thought it was my own original thought, or if indeed this is my own original thought. So I'll just put that out there for any plagiarism. But we talk about the large language model. Yeah. I'd heard that was going to start to move into an ability to do things for you, which you could call the large action model. And actually, Microsoft and other platforms are available, folks, but they're getting big on talking about agents. Yeah.
I was
So,
about to, is this agentic, which seems to be the
well,
big word?
agentic, which is I think in the dictionary is sort of based on agents, but yeah, it's so I don't think they invented that word, but just sort of the agent side. So that's sort of kind of giving it's a little bit less co-pilot, yeah, a bit more pilot, or it's giving some specific agency, and then I've got 2 more to follow that. So the large action model then progresses into the large decision model, because obviously making actions like booking a ticket is just an action, but a decision model could be booking a particular type of ticket or booking it on a particular day, or taking other factors in, and then finally. And I have a colleague who's a judge, and he's absolutely certain that artificial intelligence will never, ever, ever. I mean, he's absolutely adamant will ever get into the final phase, which I'm calling the large judgment model. You can imagine, action, decision, judgment. That's and then if you look at the problem space and you pick a space that is quite straightforward. Making a judgment in a fairly straightforward business process is obviously totally different from, an actual judge doing a legal judgment based on all sorts of complications. So I just wonder, do you think it's going to get into that space next year, or do you think we're still kind of in the Wizard of Oz? It's not real. It's not real intelligence. It's not going to go as fast as people say.
There are lots of people that are much cleverer than me involved in developing regulation around this. And so whilst we are outside of the EU, we work in businesses that work with the EU. And so we need to think about the EU AI Act. And I think ultimately the implications of artificial intelligence on citizens of the EU needs to be at the heart of, or citizens in general, not just the EU, but citizens in general needs to be at the heart of thinking about the deployment of this technology. So I'm getting quite philosophical.
That's all right. I mean, this is a really big topic. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest ones that's hit our, us as professionals.
But, what is in the best interest of a citizen? Is it that they get their case heard and a judgment made to unblock the court system? Should that decision always be made by a human? Do humans make better decisions? I mean, there's a whole sort of raft of questions there. Will AI be involved in the judgment in the next couple of years? I would probably place money that it's a no. Will AI be involved in the production or creation of supporting information to make that judgment? I can see that, particularly in a world of discovery and review. I mean,
interesting. So you've just invented the judge's co-pilot.
Well, technology assisted review has been around for the longest time, hasn't it? And so, I mean, I've been involved in a lot of conversations recently about the collection and preservation of data, that all of those
Yeah.
processes are enshrined and will be maintained. The human review aspect, there is a world where the large language models have a lot of potential and capability, could be really well deployed by undertaking that review, and could potentially come back with more accurate results than a human, or at
Yeah.
least as good as.
So we have the ability to lean into this, and we probably, because of our professional work, we're closer to some of the ins and outs of it. But but even us, I speak to me personally, not for you, Ollie, but I'm not advanced, artificial intelligence engineer, and there is a definite point where it kind of becomes magic for me also. Um, but I'm wondering whether that ability that we have, that bit of knowledge that we have, is sort of preparing us as individuals more for either the acceptance or the boundaries, etc., of what AI can and can't do next year. But if I was a person in the street looking into this, I think there would be a huge trust factor for me I just don't know how it works, and this is going to do what? And do you see where we've got this kind of populist impact of people not being brought along properly with the story, and therefore there could be just a huge rejection?
Yeah, two things come to mind. One is, and it's interesting because we're recording this right now as Rachel Reeves is publishing the budget, and I think there's a bit around, as a country, the services industry as a country is a massive part of the economy, and so educating the citizens of this country so that they understand this new technology and can be at the forefront of delivering services and growing the economy has got to be a massive part of the economic strategy. And so I think there's a
Yes.
role for government and enterprise and around education, but also how do we get exposed to it as individuals? I think just through our daily lives we'll be exposed to it more and more. So whether it is customer services or automation in how services are delivered to us, it
I
will
get that.
some of it will be explicit and exposed, and some of it will
Yeah.
just be secret sauce behind the scenes that's improving the customer experience.
So where I was coming from was 5G masts, flat Earth, vaccines.
Yeah.
There is a real challenge at the moment in society generally for certain folks to ground themselves in facts. And by the way, I'm
Yeah.
not, that's an issue. And I can see that this technology just sort of, well, it puts a 5G telephone transmitter tower into a cocked hat in terms of what it can do. I mean, it is pitchforks and torches kind of territory. So this is the bit where I think it's the trust side of things. And I don't think we'd find a lot of people at the moment who would say, yeah, I trust it, or I trust the people that are using it. And you know what I mean? There's some sort of discourse that we've got to get through, and some sort of governance that we've got to get people into the right space, because otherwise it is going to be a very much a divisive, well, potentially a divisive technology. And I think that your observation about the UK being, a big part of the UK is service driven, and actually sort of artificial intelligence has a huge role to play there, positive role to play. So it could be a massive engine for UK PLC, as they call it.
And it's interesting, one of the potential benefits of Brexit, which I'm told there are some, could be about the country's approach to regulation. So the ability for these models to be developed relies heavily on access to data and the laws around copyright of that data. And so the regulation that a jurisdiction has around that will influence the investment decision by the companies building this technology as to where they choose to reside. And I think UK is being looked at quite favorably for having, depends on, attach what label you want to it, but quite progressive stance on this. Japan, interestingly, has a very progressive stance around fair use and copyright, which is making it very favorable. So I think that's one aspect. If we're thinking about the trust aspect of it, is watching to see what the moves are by the biggest tech companies in their pursuit of winning this race.
Okay. Well, look, we got let's turn that into a bit of a prediction for 2025. So what's our key watch point for the CTO or the sort of tech savvy business user in the AI space? What are they looking out for next?
I think there's going to be a few things to watch out for. One would be when does OpenAI publish its next frontier model, and what are the capabilities? So we saw ChatGPT 3 to 3.5 to 4 was a pretty relentless increase in capability, but it feels like there's been a bit of a plateauing of capability. It's been much more of a
Yeah,
focus on engineering efficiency. Um, is there going to be another step change in capability to the extent where because it's almost like we've got used to how good ChatGPT 4.0 is, and we know its limitations now. And so again, we don't quite think of it as magic. We know to an
yeah,
extent how to deploy it. Is there going to be another frontier model where we go, oh my goodness, this changes the game once again? So I think that will be an
yeah.
interesting one.
We should probably mention. I think it's 0.1.
Yeah. So I think as I understand it, what O1 is it is an iteration on the 4.0 model, but it is forcing it, and it's much more sophisticated than this, but it's ultimately forcing it to act out with chain of thought reasoning. So it is breaking, when you ask it a question, particularly a complex question, it is breaking
Yeah,
down all of the steps and then building back the answer back up, which is why it is able to answer questions much more like a PhD student.
got
But
it,
it's also much
got it.
much more expensive. But I think what I'm hearing and reading is that there will be another frontier model in the next 6 months. Supposedly it was going to be before Christmas. I think that's one to watch.
Well, that's calendar 2025. So
Correct.
that we're talking about another frontier model coming
Mm,
in. So that
mm,
would be so my advice for folks who are getting into this is that's probably something to start
mm.
researching, start looking at it, start
Yeah,
thinking about the implications, because that's the sort of thing that could kind of very quickly squash
mm,
your current plans because a bit of tech has just leapfrogged the
yeah,
problem you're trying to
yeah.
solve. That sort of thing.
I think another one to watch out for is, and this is more on the sort of boring implementation side, which is wait and see what Microsoft does around their pricing structure. So they came out the blocks, obviously, with Copilot, which is a paid bolt-on. So if you're in the enterprise, you have E1, E3, E5 licensing. Most large
Yeah,
organizations tend to buy E5. It's the most economic way to do it if you're buying all of the capabilities, but you still have
yeah,
to buy Copilot as a bolt-on. So it is an additional investment decision to make, which
yes,
requires business cases, et cetera, et cetera. I think I would bet there'll be either E5 will be extended to include Copilot, or a new tier will emerge where Microsoft will make it compelling enough for various reasons to take that. And I wonder how
yeah,
long we'll see Copilot as something around the edges, and versus it just being built into the
yeah.
offering.
Personally, so I mean, cards on the table. Yeah, we're all in on
Mm.
Copilot, and so and other platforms are available, folks. But one of the key decision points for me, which I think is relevant to 2025, is it gives me a single environment, providing I'm purchasing things that are compatible. It
Yeah,
gives me a single environment to be able to govern prompts and responses.
yeah,
So I can see, and my team can see everything that gets prompted for.
yeah,
And then using, again, another bit of AI, we've got some patterns that get matched that then, would cause us to intervene or to, investigate, for poor use of a prompt. And there's some stuff built in already that will stop you doing ridiculous prompts, but there's still obviously a requirement to look over the top of it. So when we get into this trust space, that's a big part for me. But I can see, the point you're making. I think if we say it's Copilot or it's anything else, it's all about it being a sort of a component that is within pretty much every bit of
yeah,
software we consume,
yeah,
and it's whether or not those are different components, or whether it's all running off of a common rail, so that the components can talk to each other and everything else. So
yeah,
I totally agree with you. I think it's going to turn from, individual productivity tool which is probably its sort of perception at the moment, into platform.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting.